I love to sell. I love to be on the front lines. Even when I was a VP of sales, I did a lot of that. And I'm on the front lines for my clients now, helping them run down deals, because I just don't believe that if you're not in it, how are you building a playbook to support it?
Hi, I'm Terrell Turner, the host of the Business Talk Library, and today I have a special guest on, one of the founders of Mud City. And the reason why I like this guest is because it is a topic that every business needs to actually get good at if they're going to be successful, and that is the sales and revenue generation process. So welcome to the show, Jessica.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. Now, Jessica, before you started Mud City, what was your background before that?
Yeah, so I've been in sales for a long time. I kind of cut my teeth in the sales world at a company called CEB, Corporate Executive Board, now Gartner. If you know of it, you probably know of it because they were the authors of the Challenger sale, which is a really popular sort of sales methodology that a lot of companies adopt or use elements of in their sales philosophies. So I feel like I got kind of a crash course in all things sales, sales theory, sales methodology, how companies should think about structuring their sales teams. And then I left there and joined a company here in Chicago called Jellyvision. And then I was ultimately the VP of sales there for about 3 years. Prior to that, director of business development. And so I had a really fun run at Jellyvision before launching Mud City, which is a sales and revenue operations consultancy that I founded alongside my co-founder, Jeremy Von Holly, who was actually the VP of revenue operations, sort of the ops side of the sales function at Jellyvision. So we did a lot of things. We kind of had this really cool sandbox to play in and test things. And then ultimately we took a step back and we're like, a lot of companies could benefit. A lot of early stage companies in particular could benefit from sort of the things we've learned here, which we're now taking to market.
Awesome. Now, when it comes down to working with early stage companies, do you find that a lot of them really understand the sales process, or is it that they're just very focused on, hey, we have this really cool product, we love it, and other people are going to love it too?
Definitely the latter. And if you think about it, I mean, like a lot of early stage companies, their founders are still leading sales. And founders aren't necessarily salespeople. A lot of times they come from a product background or, finance background. I mean, like there's a multitude of founder backgrounds. And so I think where a founder doesn't necessarily have a sales background, it's a lot of like, I'm really passionate about my product, which is great for sort of those initial like product fit conversations. But then when you look to say, how do we scale sales? How do we get more of it more consistently and more forecastably? That's where we tend to come in, because at that point, you need a methodology, you need process, you need technology to enable your reps. You need to figure out what kind of reps you even want to hire. And so there's a lot of critical decisions that happen as you start to think about scaling revenue, and that's what we help with.
Gotcha. So when you were kind of navigating your way through, like I said, your pre-Mud City life of just the different sales roles, were there a lot of similarities in the process, or are you finding that companies had drastically different approaches to the process?
That's a really good question. I think drastically different. I really think so. And sometimes that's really well warranted, right? Like if you were to expect a very similar sales process at Grubhub, and then to go to a company like Relativity, like that, it's, there's a lot of good reasons for change and differences. But I think oftentimes one of the biggest mistakes companies make is they develop their sales process based on how they want to work instead of how their customers want to buy.
Wow.
So it's how do we want to take our product to market? Like what works for us? And they just expect that their customer is like, okay, no, like you really do have to go the extra mile and fundamentally understand what it takes your customer to procure a piece of technology. Oftentimes your decision makers have only purchased a piece of technology maybe once in the past, if at all. It's altogether not that common to be working with someone who is just like really good at buying. And so our whole fundamental sort of approach, which for those people who are like at all well-versed in Challenger is pretty symbiotic to that, is like you really have to help your customer understand what it takes to procure a piece of technology, a piece of software, really anything. And then build your sales process around that. Otherwise, you're creating a lot of friction. You're not really being helpful. And you're probably not going to win.
Mhm. And so speaking of that, when it comes down to Mud City, what are some of the products and services that you guys offer?
Oh man, so it kind of like scales the gambit based on company needs. So, again, I think what's unique about us is that we sort of put together two functionalities, which is sales theory, best practice playbook building, but then also like the revenue operations piece, which is like the technology that fuels all of that and makes it super efficient. So when you work with us, you get two pieces of the puzzle that in modern day selling just has to be there. Like I just don't know how you can really scale without a CRM, without the appropriate tooling. It just has to be there. And so we work with companies to either kind of set that out for the first time, how should we structure our sales team? Like, how should we be thinking about going to market? What kind of rep profiles do we require? What should our playbook be? All the way from point of first conversation to point of renewal, right? Or we can work in more truncated fashions where it's like, hey, we really need help thinking about top of the funnel, or hey, we really need help post sale because we're struggling with renewal. So we can be as broad as you'd like us to be, depending on sort of how open you are to an end-to-end engagement, or we can be as pointed as you need us to be. Although we do believe that you have to start with a good foundation. And that's sort of in the name, Mud City, which I don't know if you know, but it's an old nickname for Chicago.
Okay.
So yeah.
Okay, awesome. So now, speaking of, like I said, Mud City as a business, so what has that been like? I mean, going from working in a business as an essential part of the sales team to now, you're in the sales process, you're having to get your own clients, but you're also having to run the business. What is that like?
Different. It's different. And we started our business in quarantine, like the entire life cycle. I mean, we launched our business 3 months ago. So, the entire life cycle of our business has been in this ecosystem, which isn't in and of itself non-traditional, right?
Yes.
And so I think I love to sell. I love to be on the front lines. Even when I was a VP of sales, I did a lot of that. And I'm on the front lines for my clients now, helping them run down deals, because I just don't believe that if you're not in it, how are you building a playbook to support it? Like, I just really don't understand how you can do one without the other. So that piece I love. Like, I'm glad to be back doing that piece of things. I think where we're learning as like new founders is how do you execute flawlessly while also like setting a vision for the future and making sure that you are continuing to invest in where you want to go just as intentionally as you're delivering against your current obligations. And so I think my co-founder and I are like having a lot of conversations about balance in that regard, which is new for us.
Hmm. Now, how do you approach that? I mean, when it comes down to like the salespeople that I've met, and I always curious as to when I ask them about, how do you balance, going after the sale? Because like I said, you got to hunt and you got to catch, or you don't eat. So it's
Yeah.
like, how do you find balance, or what are ways that you approach balance in that?
So I think it may sound counterintuitive because I think when a lot of people think about sales, they think about getting as much as they can right away. I actually think it's very much the opposite. I think you have to get very specific about where you win and where you do your best work and work there and work with intent. So it's been a lot of like, what is the right client for us right now? Like what is the right early partnerships for us? Who are the companies that we're really excited to partner with, where we feel like the work that we can do is like really exciting. And then sort of setting guardrails on that and saying, don't take more than you can handle. Don't take more than it's going to actually hold you back from looking at Mud City and saying, where can this go? What can this be? Because we're also directly responsible for that. And so I think we've had to do what we ask our clients to do, which is get very specific about our role in the market and who we work best with.
Mhm. And do you find that some salespeople tend to have a little bit of anxiety about that? Like when it comes down to like, hey, focusing on, pretty much the best place for you to invest your time, do they tend to have some anxiety like, well, what if I miss out on these sales? Or how do you kind of help them navigate or think through that?
Yeah, it's so interesting because like I feel, I mean, every vertical has it, but I think you just like feel the weight of opportunity cost a lot more in sales in the day to day. And so we do a lot of training, and really good sales leaders out there are probably like, yes, like we do a ton of training on for every minute spent with an opportunity or with a contact that isn't serious. Those are minutes not spent with companies who are. So like we really, really like train qualification, um, great alignment with the problem, with the need, because if it's not there, your time is effectively wasted. Like we are commission based, like we to your point, like we eat, we kill, in many cases. And so we have to be very strategic about where our time is placed. And I think a lot of that is sort of like the early training of a rep to get very clear on what good looks like there.
Mhm. Awesome, awesome. Now, where can potential customers find you guys online or on social media to follow your story or what's going on with your company?
Yeah, so www.mudcity.io is where you can find our website and learn just more about how we work with customers and about us as people, our background and experiences. You can also find us on LinkedIn, Mud City. We have an Instagram, although I think like most early stage companies, we're like, what is this and how do we use it well? So I mean, there's like some pretty pictures. Feel free to check them out. We're still figuring it out. If you are like a social guru, please hit me up.
Awesome. So before we wrap up, there's two questions that I'd like to ask that I think that will be very, very helpful for the audience. And
Yeah.
a lot of entrepreneurs and business leaders listen to the show, and some of them either I guess they're familiar with sales, or some of them are not. So when you think about a young starting business, or I say early stage business, what are some of the early things that you tell them that, hey, this is what you need to have in your sales process to start building out something that's going to be scalable?
The very first thing that I'll say is you have to know your customer. Like you have to be, I think a lot of early stage companies have spent a lot of time refining and perfecting a product. And now it's getting just as intimately connected to your customer's problem. If you are not an expert in the problem you're trying to solve, there is no process that I could help you stand up. There is no person that I could help you hire that could appropriately sell your solution. We sell tools to solve problems. That is what sellers do. And if you as an organization or you as a founder don't feel like you have a whip smart understanding of the customer's problem, then you are behind. Start there.
Awesome. And then the last thing is, when you think about kind of your journey so far with working with so many different companies, and then also now with starting and running your own, what's been a lesson you've kind of learned on that side of the business that you're like, you know what, this is a lesson that entrepreneurs and business owners need to grasp if they want to be successful?
That's like such a good question. I think you should at some point do like a reel where it's just people answering this question. It'd be really good. For me, I think it's probably more personal, just in terms of how I interact with the problems I'm faced with, or like the challenges I'm faced with, because they're constant, right? Like if you're in sales, like every opportunity is going to hit a snag, or like you're destined to walk into work one day and feel like you're not going to hit your quota. Like those moments of like you hit the cliff in sales a lot, because it's very much there's a number here and are you or aren't you. And so I think for me, it's that sellers and leaders in sales often believe that they can stress themselves to a solution. That like, if I just dig my heels in hard enough, if I just like grit my teeth hard enough, like I can get there. And I actually found that to be very untrue. You cannot stress yourself to a solution because you can't get to the right answer in a bad headspace. And so one of the things that I learned to sort of reject, actually not even that long ago, like probably like a year and a half, 2 years ago, is sort of like the idea of hustle culture. And instead being very intentional about how I approach a problem. If I really feel like I don't have the answer, stepping away, like step away, give things the space that they need to process, and coming back with a fresh set of eyes, or coming back with like a collaborative team, and giving yourself some space to process problems and process solutions that that don't just further burn you out, right? Because like if you're really struggling, you're probably struggling because you're burnt out. So like give yourself some space, give yourself some recovery time. Don't try to stress yourself to a solution because it won't work.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Jessica, thank you so much for taking time to hop on the show to talk about, the great things going on with Mud City, and for sharing the wisdom and the insight. We'll definitely share some links so people can follow you and see what's the story going on with Mud City.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It was awesome to talk shop with you for 15 minutes.
Thanks for tuning in to the Business Talk Library. If you like what you heard and you want to hear more, be sure to click the subscribe button and follow us on all social media platforms as the Business Talk Library.